When was the last time someone's judgment, a passing comment, or an unspoken tension shattered your peace and made you question everything you thought you were? Was it your partner's icy silence when you dared to share a new dream? Your colleague's mocking grin when you mentioned you were exploring spirituality? Or maybe it was your own reaction, the surge of anger, the sudden shame that told you you're not as free as you believed. You are about to discover why. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery about shadow projection, the idea that the hidden parts of yourself you refuse to see are exactly what you can't stand in other people. This is not theory. This is a mirror you can't look away from. Meet Marjorie. She's 31 years old. To everyone around her, she's composed, successful, endlessly reasonable. But in private, she's tormented by the same question that keeps you up at night. Why do the same types of people keep showing up in my life, draining me, derailing me, and blocking every step toward spiritual growth? What I'm about to show you will forever change how you see the hidden parts of yourself reflected in other people. If you think you already understand why you react so intensely to certain personalities, get ready. Because until you see this clearly, you will keep attracting the same people, the same patterns, and the same pain, no matter how hard you try to escape it. This isn't about them. It's about you. Stay until the end, because I'll reveal Carl Jung's most dangerous insight about why some people instinctively sabotage your spiritual growth. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to recognize and distance yourself from the 6 archetypal personalities that will drain your energy, undermine your purpose, and keep you trapped in spiritual stagnation. If you're ready to break free, keep watching, because what Marjorie discovers next will shatter everything you thought you knew about other people and yourself. Marjorie thought she had it all figured out. She meditated, she journaled, she even read every book she could find on spiritual growth. But none of that prepared her for the sudden jolt she felt when her co-worker, Ben, sneered at her new project idea in front of the team. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Her hands went cold, her voice cracked, and for the rest of the day, she replayed the moment over and over. Why did he trigger me so much? In the quiet of her apartment that night, she came across a sentence that would start to unravel everything she thought she knew. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Those words hit her like a slap, because Marjorie had always believed that her reactions were justified, that other people's behavior caused her suffering. And she's not alone. Carl Jung observed that most people believe that the problems in their lives are caused by the flaws, rudeness, or ignorance of others. They think, if only my partner were more supportive, if only my boss weren't so arrogant, if only my family understood me. But here's the false assumption everyone makes. They think these feelings are about the other person. They believe the discomfort originates externally, when in reality, the discomfort is the flash of your own shadow, the repressed, unaccepted traits you've buried deep inside yourself. Marjorie never wanted to admit that she too was capable of arrogance, that she secretly resented other people's success, that she carried the same hidden insecurities she despised in Ben. This is why you can't look away when someone exposes that part of you. Because it's the part you've spent your entire life denying. And when you deny it long enough, you project it onto anyone who gets too close. You think you're seeing their darkness, but you're really meeting your own. Marjorie sat with that realization. Her heart was pounding. Her palms were sweating. She knew in that moment that her spiritual awakening was never going to come from reading another book, or forcing herself to think positive thoughts. It was going to come from facing the truth, that every person who triggered her was holding up a mirror she was terrified to look into. But here's where it gets dangerous. The more you avoid the mirror, the more power it has over you, and the more you attract exactly the same archetypes over and over who will block your growth until you finally confront what you've hidden. Marjorie couldn't sleep that night. Her mind kept circling the same thought. What if it's true? What if the traits I can't stand in others are my own? When dawn broke, she felt hollow. A part of her wanted to forget the whole thing and slip back into blaming Ben, her parents, her ex, the world. Because blame is seductive. It feels cleaner than self-examination. It feels safer than vulnerability. But deep down, she sensed that safety was an illusion. As Carl Jung explained in his work on the shadow, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Carl Jung's most controversial insight was this: if you refuse to confront your own repressed qualities, you will be compelled to see them everywhere else. It doesn't matter how spiritual you think you are, how many affirmations you recite, how carefully you curate your image. Your shadow always finds a way out. And when it does, you'll convince yourself you're simply protecting your energy. You'll call it setting boundaries. You'll say, I just attract narcissists, or people are always trying to hold me back. But the uncomfortable reality is this: the more you deny your own hidden traits, the more obsessed you become with seeing them in others. Marjorie thought she was above that. She thought her meticulous self-awareness would protect her. Yet in that moment, she realized she'd simply created a more sophisticated disguise, a disguise made of spiritual language and personal growth jargon, a disguise that kept her trapped in a cycle of projection where everyone else was always the problem, and she was always the misunderstood victim. This is the trap that keeps millions of people stuck. The belief that spiritual awakening is about transcending darkness rather than integrating it. Because integration demands something no book or teacher can give you: the courage to admit you are not only the light, but also the darkness. Marjorie felt her stomach twist. She wondered how many friendships she'd sabotaged because she couldn't see her own envy, how many opportunities she'd lost because she projected her fear of failure onto others. It was easier to blame Ben for being arrogant than to see that she was terrified of her own ambition. And this is exactly how projection becomes your cage. It locks you inside a story where you are powerless and everyone else holds the key. But here's where it gets dangerous. The more you insist it's all someone else's fault, the less you see the truth. You are the one holding the door closed. Marjorie sat in her car during her lunch break, staring out at the parking lot. She felt raw, exposed, as if someone had peeled her skin back and shown her everything she never wanted to see. She thought about the countless times she'd walked away from people, convinced they were toxic, the countless times she'd told herself she was protecting her peace. But now, she was starting to suspect that she'd been protecting something else. Her refusal to look within. Marjorie realized she'd spent her life trying to silence the part of her she couldn't understand. In his work on the unconscious mind, Carl Jung described it this way: in each of us, there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from the way we see ourselves. In Shadow Projection, Carl Jung explained that the psyche is not a simple, unified thing. It is a layered, conflicted system. And the parts we reject, our envy, our aggression, our hunger for validation, don't disappear just because we pretend they're not there. They slip underground, they fester, and eventually they rise back up in the only way they can, by attaching themselves to the people around us. If you've ever wondered why you keep attracting the same kinds of relationships, why the same personality types seem to follow you wherever you go, why you feel an immediate aversion to someone you've barely met, this is the hidden machinery at work. Your unconscious mind is determined to bring these disowned traits to your attention, and if you won't look inward, it will create situations and encounters that force you to see them in others. Marjorie felt her pulse quicken. She remembered the first time she met Ben, the way she'd instantly disliked him without even knowing his last name. She used to think her intuition was warning her. But what if it wasn't intuition at all? What if it was projection, her unacknowledged ambition masquerading as judgment? Carl Jung observed that most people believe they are perceiving reality with perfect clarity. They think their perceptions are objective, but in truth, much of what you see is simply your shadow, reflected back at you. This was the false assumption that had ruled Marjorie's life. The belief that her feelings about other people were evidence of who they were, rather than evidence of what she hadn't accepted in herself. It was almost too much to bear. Because if this was true, she realized, then every conflict she'd ever had was a message she refused to read. Every judgment was an invitation she declined. Every irritation was a clue she ignored. This was the system. This was the machinery behind her suffering. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. And the moment you take responsibility for your projections, you lose the comforting illusion that it's all someone else's fault. What Marjorie discovered next will shock you. Marjorie's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. The realization she'd been circling all week finally crystallized into something she could no longer deny. I've been the architect of my own stagnation. For years, she thought she was simply unlucky. That life kept delivering her the same draining people, the same impossible situations, because she was too sensitive, too earnest for a world so unkind. But in the stark light of morning, that story felt brittle, like a porcelain mask she'd clung to out of desperation. Marjorie felt a strange relief in finally telling herself the truth. And yet, she also understood why she'd resisted it for so long. Carl Jung once observed, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Carl Jung warned that the shadow doesn't disappear just because you pretend it isn't there. It grows stronger, more cunning, more determined to make itself known. And when you refuse to meet it voluntarily, it forces you to meet it involuntarily, through the people who irritate you the most. Marjorie saw it now with brutal clarity. Her habit of blaming Ben for his arrogance was easier than confronting her own fear of failure. Her pattern of cutting off friends who disagreed with her was easier than admitting she was terrified of rejection. Her story of being an innocent victim was easier than taking ownership of her hidden hunger for validation. This is the trap of innocence. When you deny your shadow, you condemn yourself to a life of powerlessness. You will always be at the mercy of other people's behavior. You will always feel reactive, defensive, perpetually offended. And you will believe your suffering proves your virtue, when in truth, it only proves your refusal to grow. Marjorie thought about every time she'd ended a relationship with a self-righteous speech about boundaries. Every time she'd walked away convinced she was the evolved one. Every time she'd told herself she deserved better, while secretly running from the parts of herself she couldn't face. It was a nauseating realization, and yet for the first time in years, she felt something resembling relief. Because if she was the one creating the pattern, maybe she was also the one who could end it. But even that thought carried a quiet terror. Because to end it, she would have to look in the mirror without flinching. Carl Jung observed that most people believe spiritual awakening is about rising above their darkness. They imagine enlightenment as a state of perpetual calm, untouched by the messiness of human emotion. But this is the greatest lie of all, because the only way to awaken is to integrate the parts of yourself you've exiled, the parts you project onto others because you cannot bear to claim them. And the moment you do, everything changes. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you step into that responsibility, there is no going back. You can never again pretend you are innocent. You can never again pretend you are powerless. What Marjorie realized next would become the turning point in her entire life. Marjorie sat cross-legged on her living room floor, her journal open on her lap. Sunlight spilled across the pages, illuminating the one sentence she had finally dared to write. I am the person I judge. It felt like a confession and a liberation all at once, because for the first time, she was not trying to justify herself. She was not rehearsing all the ways other people had failed her. She was simply telling the truth. It struck Marjorie that she had spent years calling her patterns bad luck. But maybe it was something far deeper. Carl Jung once warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Carl Jung's solution was radical. He didn't advise you to avoid the people who trigger you. He didn't suggest you abandon every relationship that feels uncomfortable. He believed that every irritation was a priceless invitation, an invitation to turn inward, to examine the part of you that resonates with what you claim to hate. When Marjorie first read this, she resisted it with everything she had. It felt unfair. Didn't she have the right to be upset when people were arrogant, selfish, manipulative? But as the days passed, she began to see what Jung meant. Shadow projection isn't about excusing toxic behavior. It's about refusing to let that behavior become the excuse for your own unconsciousness. Marjorie realized she had been using other people's flaws as a smokescreen for her own disowned impulses. Her disgust with Ben's arrogance was a way to deny her own ambition. Her irritation with her friend's constant bragging was a way to avoid acknowledging how badly she wanted to be recognized. Her resentment toward her partner's stubbornness was a mirror of her own refusal to change, and as long as she kept blaming them, she never had to confront herself. Carl Jung's philosophy shows that the only path to true spiritual growth is the path of radical ownership. It means saying, "This reaction belongs to me. This discomfort is my teacher. This darkness is not theirs alone. It is mine too." When you claim what you despise, something miraculous happens. The energy you were wasting on denial becomes fuel for transformation. Marjorie began to notice it almost immediately. Her anxiety started to ease. Her need to control every interaction softened, and most surprisingly, the people she thought she needed to avoid suddenly lost their power over her. Because when you own your shadow, no one can use it against you. When you integrate what you reject, no one can trigger it in you. But here's where it gets dangerous. Integration is not an event. It is a lifetime commitment to meeting your darkness over and over, without flinching, without self-pity, without retreat. What Marjorie did next would change her life forever. Marjorie didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Not because she looked any different, but because for the first time, she wasn't seeing her reflection through the lens of blame. She felt lighter, as if 1,000 invisible ropes had finally fallen away. This freedom didn't come from cutting people off or perfecting herself. It came from something far more subversive, owning what she once tried so hard to hide. Marjorie realized that no amount of positive thinking could erase the parts of herself she was afraid to see. Carl Jung captured it perfectly when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Carl Jung believed that those who have the courage to confront their shadows gain something most people will never touch: true autonomy. Because when you stop projecting, you stop living in reaction. You stop letting other people's flaws dictate your sense of self. You stop needing constant validation that you're better than those who trigger you. Marjorie tested this the next time she saw Ben. He interrupted her in the meeting. He made his usual smug comments. But instead of flinching, she felt a strange calm. Not because he'd changed, but because she had. She could see, without shame or denial, the part of her that still craved recognition. The part that felt threatened by his boldness. The part that longed to be unapologetically ambitious, too. She didn't excuse his behavior. She didn't pretend it was okay. But she no longer needed it to be different to feel whole. This is the quiet revolution that happens when you integrate your shadow. You reclaim the energy you once spent judging, resenting, and resisting. You become free to choose your response, instead of being hijacked by old wounds. Marjorie realized that spiritual awakening isn't some mystical state of permanent bliss. It's the gritty, unglamorous work of seeing your own darkness without flinching. It's the willingness to say, "This too is me." And in that radical acceptance, something miraculous emerges. A sense of inner solidity no one can take away. This is how you stop attracting the same draining archetypes. This is how you break the cycle that has kept you small. This is how you begin to live beyond projection. Carl Jung's psychology reveals that when you embrace your hidden traits, you stop scattering your power into the shadows of other people. Marjorie didn't need to announce her transformation. She didn't need to convince anyone she was different. Her presence spoke for itself. Because when you integrate your shadow, you radiate an authenticity that no one can counterfeit. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you taste this freedom, you can never again pretend you don't know where it comes from. You can never again blame the world for the work you have refused to do. Marjorie knew she would spend the rest of her life meeting her darkness over and over, without shrinking back. And in that commitment, she finally understood. This is what it means to awaken. Marjorie used to believe that spiritual growth was about escaping her flaws, becoming so enlightened, so pure, that no one could ever touch her wounds again. But she discovered the truth Carl Jung spent a lifetime trying to teach. You don't awaken by rising above your shadow. You awaken by turning toward it. You awaken by reclaiming every piece of yourself you tried to bury in other people. The arrogance you condemned, the envy you denied, the insecurity you projected. All of it was waiting for you to see it, own it, and integrate it. And now, you have the same dangerous knowledge Marjorie found. You know that every trigger is a map. Every conflict is a mirror. Every judgment is an invitation to step out of the cycle of blame and into the liberation of radical self-ownership. Because when you accept that you are both the light and the darkness, you become unshakable. You become free. If you found this video eye-opening, take a moment right now to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. On this channel, we explore the hidden forces shaping your psyche, and we give you the tools to claim your spiritual and emotional sovereignty. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey, because the world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs people brave enough to embrace their shadow and transform it into power. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.